Welcome to the Free Speech Forward podcast. We are a new show exploring the behind the scenes perspective and stories on the how and why of different free speech advocates, on what they believe about free speech and why it's so important to all of our lives and society. This show is a joint project. It's sponsored by a new organization, 1776 Forward, with a co-sponsor, the ILV, the Institute for Liberal Values. I'm your host, Joia, also one of the co-founders of the organization and this show. And today is a really exciting day because it is our inaugural episode of this series. And we're really taking this opportunity to introduce both the show and the two founders and co-hosts, myself and also Chris Bush. So Chris, I'm delighted to
Hello.
have you here with us today.
Likewise.
So just a really quick introduction first about Chris, so you all get to know a little bit about him. So in addition to being one of the co-founders of 1776 Forward, which is, as I mentioned, a new organization, and what we're doing is crowdsourcing activism for the cause of philosophical liberalism. And as we get into the interview, I'll be really curious to hear how your story fits in with this idea of what philosophical liberalism is all about. But in addition to being a co-founder in this organization with me, Chris is also a real estate investment and development executive and entrepreneur. After working in the real estate business on Wall Street for the past 2 decades, he is currently focused on his new mission to bring greater beauty, efficiency, and new modes of living and working to the built environment. So welcome, Chris, and I'm so glad we're getting this started.
We're here we go. Excited to be here with you and tell our stories as the precursor to hearing a lot of interesting stories from a lot of interesting people in the weeks and months to come.
So let's jump right in. Have you always been an advocate of free speech? And what started you on this path of being interested and engaged with free speech issues?
Yeah, so, I guess on the first one, effectively, yes, I have always been a free speech advocate, although I haven't always thought of myself as such. I guess you would say I kind of came into it by accident, if you will. I grew up in a fairly political family. We debated ideas and discussed politics from an early age. So that built in me a respect and a valuing for that domain. And from generally a pro kind of freedom and individualism perspective. But really, it was kind of some formative personal experiences, both in my high school and college days, that really kind of brought the issue of free speech in particular forward or to the fore for me, in both kind of a political context and a personal one. So it really showed me the value, whether it was firstly joining a high school diversity awareness club in which all of kind of the stereotypical surface and deterministic physical qualities were celebrated, but I quickly found that anyone with unorthodox political or intellectual philosophical views wasn't exactly welcomed or encouraged to speak up and contribute to the dialogue whenever things turned political. I found that kind of curious and odd, and also kind of stultifying at that point when I thought I was joining a forum to celebrate diversity. And then later in high school, on a totally different context, I was president of my high school drama club my senior year, and we were producing the first musical that our high school drama club had done in probably over a decade or so. And we were kind of doing it in a little bit of an unorthodox way without all of the other musical departments in the school, and kind of just doing it ourselves. And after, kind of a lot of back and forth, behind the scenes machinations, some of the forces who were not involved but wanted to be tried to kind of derail our entire production. And we actually had to appeal to some higher powers to make sure that we could retain our artistic kind of control and license. So that also was just an interesting example of how even kind of on the artistic and personal expression, it could be stifled. And then lastly, I guess you could say, to kind of round out the really formative experiences, this is one you'll be familiar with. During my days at NYU, Joia and I, we part of how we got our start was we were in a high school or a college philosophy club at NYU, and we actually held an event that was censored by the administration of New York University on a controversial topic at the time. And it got actually a lot of local and national press. But I mean, that was the first real experience of, being actively thwarted in speaking. So all of those just kind of showed me the direct, visceral kind of import and significance of being able to speak freely, or the opposite of what it's like when you can't.
I definitely see those as truly formative experiences. So tell us a little bit more about why you believe free speech matters. For you personally, you've already shared some of that, but also for society broadly as a whole.
Yeah, I think they're related, but starting with myself and then extrapolating from there, I've always been, like I said, I grew up discussing ideas in politics from an early age, so that just was always a domain I was very kind of conscious and aware of. But more broadly, I'm just a very verbal person. I communicate through ideas. And talking with people. I love kind of debate and discourse. So to me, that's kind of how I make sense of the world. And so the notion of not being able to do that, it feels in some ways like not being able to breathe. It's just, it's kind of like short circuiting or suppressing my way of living and getting by in the world. And I would say, I think that's the same for society writ large, in the sense that it's through debate and discussing ideas and challenging ideas that we collectively try and get to the truth of a matter for greater understanding, awareness, and ultimately progress. And discussing ideas, the whole age of reason was about that we as human beings have the capacity to get to the truth and to resolve disputes on the truth through discourse and our minds and our voices, rather than through, guns and swords, through force. So even for society, if you cut that off, then you're really cutting off the lifeblood of how we both make progress and peace as a people.
Beautifully stated. You know that one of our goals on this show is to help others, support and inspire them to find their own voice and speak
Yep.
out on controversial topics, and as advocates for free speech as a whole. So I'd love if you could share more about your own process of how you prepare for giving a speech or writing an essay, expressing yourself, taking part in activism. What are some of the things you're thinking about, or are there any tools that you find help you to be a good, successful communicator?
Yeah, I would say I'm not sure I have one kind of formulaic process, and I am still iterating and constantly experimenting with my method to always improve. It definitely depends on the context, but there are definitely some key themes, or certain principles that I like to follow. Some of those include, um, kind of writing out kind of the key points that I want to make on any topic that I'm going to be discussing or advocating on. I like to outline and order my thoughts in kind of a logical and succinct manner. Um, Depending on if it's a very kind of arcane or detailed topic, I'll do a lot of research beforehand, either on the topic and or the audience I might be speaking to make sure I know kind of all the issues at play and that are implicated. And then sometimes I'll even refer to some critical base documents like our Constitution, particularly in a political context, if I feel I might be ruffling feathers, or I'm standing up for some of our inalienable rights that are there in the paper. It's good to know you can reference them. Just as like they say, you should know your rights when dealing with certain authorities in government. It's always good to kind of be on guard with those protections. So those are some of some of my techniques. Also, I think it's good to know the argument of the other side. Kind of the best way to make your case is to be able to see honestly and objectively the other side's perspective, and then try to either answer it or rebut it with your own ideas and why you think your case is better. Um, in terms of advice for other people, I think you can draw lessons from each of those, but research your topic. I like the idea of having an intellectual buddy or sparring partner, so-called, as they say, someone who you can bounce ideas off of and refine them, sharpen your own thinking. I'm a big advocate of writing down. Writing and speaking, to me, go kind of hand in hand. They're how we express our thoughts and put them out into the world. And like I said, kind of knowing the other side's position, and dealing with it in an honest manner, because so much of our discourse today is, kind of dealt with fallacies or just outright misrepresentations of kind of what your opposition is about. And that obviously doesn't help to get to kind of a rational and conclusive outcome or debate or consideration of an idea.
Very true. Now, I know we've just told everyone that you and I have co-founded this new organization, 1776 Forward, and that this podcast is one of our key projects, certainly one of our initiating inaugural projects with this organization. But I'm curious, if you had all the time and all the money that anyone could ever want or need, what project or specific cause do you think is most worth pursuing right now as an advocate of free speech?
Yeah, just one. Well, I probably have two, and the first one you'll see why. So, um, I would say, especially in our social media age, to be able to start a platform a social media platform that is completely open and free, and that could showcase what a real kind of marketplace of ideas, unimpeded, looks like and is able to function. Um, I put an asterisk on that because Elon Musk has kind of already done that. And then, of course, there's, all kinds of other variants out there now, competing, Parler and the like, that have tried and stuff. But, I definitely think having that in an age when so much of our discourse is getting throttled by, both private and state actors, would be critical. But setting that aside, if we think the market might actually be starting to take care of that, and Elon certainly put $40 billion of his own money into that venture, which I applaud. I would say the other thing I would do is set up kind of foundations or fellowship programs in all the major universities devoted to free speech and kind of teaching the principles of free speech, particularly the law schools, the political science schools, and the philosophy departments. But ideally, it might be even something that in a kind of uh, Western culture fundamentals course, to the extent they still teach them in colleges, everybody would get. And maybe even extend that same concept down to the high school level, where you really would touch kind of everybody in the up and coming generations. Because as they say, the future is written by the next generation, by the youth, and their output is only going to be so as good as the input of us in the current generations, what we hand down to them. So I do believe that changing a culture for the long run, for the better, fundamentally, is through education.
I actually totally agree as well. When we do my version, you're going to hear my own take on
I
my own
can't
thoughts
wait to
about
hear. Yeah.
educating the next generations and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, and maybe this is the time to share with the audience, we do have a goal to keep this show very streamlined and short to really deliver this value in a nice, concise package for everyone. And so we're actually already almost at the 15-minute mark. So I'm going to jump right ahead to our last question and ask if you have any words of advice for other aspiring free speech activists, or even just the average concerned citizen facing an issue of censorship or intimidation. what would you suggest for how they can find their own voice, stand up, and speak out?
Yeah, great question, because that is what we're all about with this podcast and really our broader organization at 1776 Forward. Um, I would say it ultimately comes down to having that kind of fundamental inner confidence in your worthiness and goodness to speak out, stand up and speak out. Never let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter or isn't acceptable in a discourse, nor that your position is somehow not legitimate or less worthy of being heard than anyone else's. And it really doesn't matter what position you do or don't have vis-a-vis, government actors or anyone else in this country, which is still a free country, despite how it feels sometimes. Public servants are servants; they work for us. So that should, if anything, give you the confidence to stand up and speak out. But really more than that, it's just about not doubting yourself or the worthiness of your cause. You're a free, independent individual with as much worth and value as anyone else in this country, and you have just as much right as anyone else to speak your mind. Don't get hung up on whether you are an expert on a topic or not, or if you're great at public speaking. There's many other ways to make your voice heard that doesn't have to be in a large public forum, certainly not initially. There's all kinds of ways. Get creative, but just tell your story, share your values honestly and authentically, and that will come through and it will sway people and have an impact.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for starting this organization, this project with me. I think this was a wonderful beginning, and I'm so excited to hear all the other stories and perspectives and tools, advice that everyone is going to share to really help bring about a robust culture of free speech, both in this country and throughout the world.
Definitely. No, thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity to introduce myself and the organization. I look forward to turning the tables and doing the same with you and hearing yours so we can share with all of our audience. But yeah, that is what this is about. And this is just my experience. It's going to be different for everyone, but hopefully cumulatively and collectively we'll get a lot of great ideas coming out of this that all of you out there listening can benefit from and take away and use however you see fit.
And thanks again to all of our listeners or viewers, and definitely check out our next episodes.